and Steen is up next. And when we were researching the 7 summits of the world, there was one mountain that had a huge hole of who is the manager of this place. And that's Carstenz Pyramid. And I ended up finding out that Alex here had a lot of background working there. And we, 2.5 years ago, made phone contact, and he gave me a list of government people that I could speak with in Indonesia. I tried emailing, calling, whatever, never got a response from anybody. This is crazy. How can there be this huge mountain down there, out on a small island? But that's how it is. And Alex will give us a very interesting program up next. A very popular mountain, but with a lot of difficult issues. So you got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. Let me get myself hooked up here. I think my voice is kind of booming. Can you hear me back anyway? You can? I wonder if I should use this. If I get too excited and too loud, just tell me to be quiet with this thing. Ready? I gotta turn it on. All this high-tech stuff. Show me how to turn this on, please. Yes, I have it. All right, fantastic. Well, good morning. I'm so excited to be here that I started throwing up at about 3:30 this morning. Now, actually, I'm very excited to be here, and thank you, Roger, for the invitation. My name is Alex Van Steen, and I've been an expedition mountaineering guide with Rainier Mountaineering, Incorporated out of Washington State, since 1989. So my topic this morning, building sustainable tourism in Papua, Indonesia, is I find a very challenging topic, and it's not one that doesn't have a lot of different opinions on which way to go and what to do. And I think keep in mind that I'm speaking primarily from the perspective of a commercial tour operator, but I think the information that I'm presenting today is going to be pretty exciting for everybody. Oops. All right, there we go. I wear a lot of different hats with our company. I'm our environmental manager and I'm our safety officer, but probably the most challenging project that I have undertaken in the last few years is to try to develop our adventure tourism program on Carstensz. And we especially wanted to put together a program that was environmentally and socially and relationally highly responsible. Now, this is difficult for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into some of those and share what I've learned. But there are other models for commercial operations which may seem to make better business sense or to make better short-term sense than what I'm going to put forth. But I want to encourage all of us, whether we're commercial operators or independent users, to go into this area with the very highest regard possible for the indigenous peoples, for the lands where they live, and for their cultures. In the early 1990s, while guiding on Mount Rainier, I met a woman who had grown up in the highlands village of Hitadipa, just north of Carstenz Pyramid. The friendship between our families grew over the years, and Amy and her brother John became key resources in our developing adventure tourism there in Papua. As we collaborated to build this adventure, this model of a high regard, of consideration, of a high standard, I'll say, and a good relationship with the indigenous peoples was foundationally important for us. And it was also key to the indigenous people who they expressed that they were ready to tackle this new endeavor, which is they needed to be the business owners. They wanted to be the operators, not just the porters, not just the trail clearers, not just the cooks. So beginning in 2011, I started this project, and I found out, well, right away, it's no easy task. Roger mentioned one little hiccup there, but I'll tell you, the cultural differences between our contemporary Western society and a traditional Papuan society are strikingly different. And so I'll try to explain how RMI builds these relationships, but it's also really important to contrast what I'm going to present with what other operators or what other models are doing. And that is that sometimes they're going in pretty quickly, gaining a summit, having an experience, taking some pictures, and not really leaving the indigenous people with anything that they say is very lasting. We may have to put aside our Western cultural mindset of taking pictures, grabbing summits, and going home if we truly want to put the Papuans and their land first and to have a model that is sustainable. This will sound a bit harsh, but our Western attitude has been described to me in exceedingly harsh terms by the tribal Papuans. They told me that they look on it as rape and run tourism. And this is because we're seen as taking, maybe not even just taking, but taking aggressively and not giving anything back to them. So pursuing this model then that builds relationships trumps other models that are in place. One other model is to hire security to travel through the lands. So the operators with their tourists then are hiring folks to guide them through, and those folks are armed. Or using helicopters to bypass those tribal villages altogether. Now, those models do indeed offer a short-term solution to get people to Carstensz, but they're not building relationships which we believe is going to be the long-term sustainable model. Those models are antagonistic. We're muscling our way through their land. We're bypassing villages altogether. As a matter of fact, the villagers recognize that we're depriving them of whatever resources we might be bringing into the area. So again, we're feeling like those models aren't going to be sustainable. Two stark examples of the evidence I speak of. First, the increasing conflicts that we hear about or read about between operators and their tourists and the indigenous Papuans, whether we're hiring them as porters or whether they're the villagers who we encounter on the trail. The original Alaga route, which was used to climb Carstensz for the first time in 1962, has all been but abandoned because there's so much tension on that route. A second bit of evidence is that more and more tourists, climbers, whatever you want to call us, are calling for help. And I think some of this is just that we've failed to plan ahead and prepare properly. We may not have a security evacuation plan, for example. Or maybe when we chose who was going to be our outfitter, we looked at the bottom dollar amount more than we did anything else. And we kind of shortcut ourselves there. I have to ask myself, how many more incidents can our industry handle? We had an August 2012 incident where a commercial guided group was held at bay for a few hours, really held hostage, severely intimidated, and they extorted money from them. And they, as far as I could discern, did a lot of things right. Even when commercial operators do a lot of things right and plan ahead and prepare really well, there's still enormous cultural divisions that make the whole endeavor extremely difficult. So regardless of why, of course, any of these incidents deter tourism, they don't make it a friendly place to go. The essential question becomes, like, what actions, what initiatives, what model of tourism fosters sustainability? This is what I want to know. For a historical perspective now on the involvement of outsiders recognized that the first missionaries came to the interior highlands only in the 1950s. And when they came, they encountered primarily uncontacted tribal peoples. Now, although the Dutch have colonized Indonesia or New Guinea originally, from the perspective of the Papuans, the current colonizer is the nation of Indonesia, but even that has only been since the 1960s, and Indonesia has effectively opened Papua to tourism only since 2006. So this is all really, really new. This is kind of an opportunity for us really in an infant stage. And commercial operators like RMI have an opportunity to go into these areas, to build relationships with the indigenous people that are going to help the tourism industry become a little bit more sustainable and are going to help connect our two different cultures. And no doubt, it's extremely difficult at many fronts. For one, we simply cannot grasp the cultural divide between our world and a tribal society. As much as we'd like to, it's immensely difficult. So I want to give you some examples of why, of what this divide looks like. The whole of Indonesia is a land of immense diversity. And honestly, even our Western concept of multiculturalism barely allows us to grapple with the diversity that's present in Indonesia. For example, in Papua alone, there are over 300 different tribal languages. And the Papuan people are ethnically distinct from other Indonesians. There's an extremely harsh topography of very steep mountains, thick, dense jungles, raging rivers, seems like bottomless swamps. These are topographic features that have divided tribes across the ages, and now a nearly total lack of infrastructure on the island continues to separate tribal groups. As well, there is a Free Papua movement, which you may have read about, and practically speaking, every indigenous Papuan is a member of the movement. As well, the indigenous people still commonly engage in tribal warfare. Witchcraft is still actively practiced, and a retribution ethic. So this is like a Hatfields and McCoy's eye for an eye ethic is still deeply ingrained in the DNA of a lot of our tribal peoples. And though headhunting and cannibalism have not been documented in all of the highlands tribes, these tribal people appear to us anyway as still being very violent and at least being very, very unpredictable. So, and yet, in the face of all of these challenges, the indigenous Papuans want sustainable tourism, not just us. So a tiny bit of evidence for this is the fact that RMI has been partnering with one such Papuan who is working very diligently to get off the ground and to build his credibility. As well, the desire to be involved in community development, of which tourism is certainly a part of, was expressed to me over and over and over again in my most recent trip. People are absolutely interested in community development. And so RMI is seeking to partner with the indigenous peoples, asking them what do you want, and not just impose on them our goals. Like, I want to get my climbers to Carstensz. That's a little bit lower in our hierarchy. So RMI's connection. Really, the direct route setting for RMI's connection, for my relationship building that's going on in Papua, started with Bill and Gracie Cutts, who arrived as missionaries in Moni tribal lands in the early 1950s. Now, whatever you may think of the role of missionaries in tribal societies, history to this point indicates that if it hadn't been for the missionaries, we would not have access to these people in this land. And while logging operations and mining operations have set up shop in Papua, they are absolutely not interested in supporting the recreation of the tourism industry. Missionaries were the ones who intentionally sought to develop relationships with the indigenous people. They're the ones who learned their languages. They're the ones who lived and died in those communities. And it's really interesting to note that only in 1937 had the first known meeting between a European and a Moni tribe taken place. So Bill and Gracie were some of the very first white folks to come live among the Moni. The Moni number approximately 25,000 people, which, and they're a larger highland tribe, but certainly there are many people there. So their numbers are quite small, comparatively speaking. And they inhabit the lands and the jungles north of our objective, Carstenz Pyramid. Bill and Gracie ultimately took in 6 orphans, which later saved their life. You see, by introducing the Bible to the Moni people, this challenged a lot of traditional practices, and so they were seen as evil white spirits. And so a lot of the locals wanted to kill them. But what happened was, as the locals went from village to try to gather support for the killing, each village refused because each village had a baby with Bill and Gracie. And so Bill and Gracie lived and adopted John and Amy into their family. And these 2 white missionary kids grew up knowing the Moni world as well as the Western world. Do you see, I couldn't have any better interpreters of the culture, of the language, of the custom than with John and Amy. My relationship with them has provided a distinct advantage to RMI in trying to develop this relational model for tourism, and it also has helped my relationship with the Papuans. So now RMI, through my relationship with John and Amy, has been able to assist one indigenous Papuan man of the Moni tribe to establish himself as the very first non-Indonesian owner-operator for adventures on Carstensz. And we expect years of hard work, years of relationship building ahead of us. But what we're hoping for is a model of tourism that isn't seen as antagonistic, that isn't seen as just take and no give, and that is completely sustainable, or hopefully sustainable. All right, so let's talk about the opportunities, whether we're commercial operators or whether you're independent climbers wanting to get in there. What are the opportunities for relationship building that we feel are the key to sustainable tourism? So the model that we propose is the model that RMI uses all over the world. The difference here is that Papua is so challenging on so many fronts, and the culture is so significantly different than anything we've experienced anywhere else in the world. So I want to say that our model is a social ethic. So a little bit like leave no trace, the environmental ethic, or do no harm, the medical ethic, but this time we'll turn it around positive and we'll say give relationship is our social ethic. So whether you have connections in Papua or this is your first time out there, being able to appreciate a distinctly foreign culture and behave appropriately is the very beginning of good relationship building. In the following slides, I'm going to try to give you some examples of some of the encounters I've had that model well the idea of giving relationship and of the building of relationship. And I start by looking at the context I had with community officials and leaders. Now, I made so many, I had so many encounters with so many people, I can't possibly go through them all, but it's all, I highlighted some of them here. The essential question when I was speaking with these folks was, you know, if you want a partnership, what does a partnership look like for you? What do you want? Moses Sondegau, who is the man in the right-hand photographs with me, works with the local Regency government, and he and I walked together from one village, Sugapa, to another, Hidatipa, which was about 4 hours, and we had a significant time to chat. And what I learned was that Moses had worked with tour operators for the past decade or so as a porter, and the abuses that he saw toward the porters spurred him to work for the government on behalf of his people. So he now ensures that commercial operators treat their porters well and pay their porters as promised. What he told me was that only 75% of the porters had been paid as promised. So his task is not an easy task because he's effectively policing both the foreign operators as well as the Indonesian operators. That said, he was shocked because I spent so much time chit-chatting with him on the way to Hitadipa. I asked him about his family. I showed him on my smartphone pictures of my family, and I engaged in what I consider just standard kindnesses that you would show to anybody who you were walking a few hours with. But he told me that no foreigner had ever expressed so much interest in him as a person as I did that day, which really rather shocked me. So I told him, I said, Moses, you are an usuame. You are a good man. You're working on behalf of the people, your own people, and you're doing a hard job. And he sincerely appreciated that. In this arena, going into schools and sports clinics and churches, I was invited and took opportunity to speak at 2 church services. I assisted with an interfaith Muslim-Christian soccer camp, and I spoke at 2 high school classrooms at an international school. And one of my most intense experiences came in this arena. And you wouldn't think that when you just look up there and say schools and churches and stuff, but we'd been hiking through the jungle all day, and the rain was just incessantly pouring on us, and we're coming into this village called Gamagai. And all of a sudden I hear all this yelling, all these men are yelling. And then as I'm walking into town, I see all these people running toward me. And one of them was highly agitated, really waving his arms and screaming loudly. And this is how I was introduced to Atan Topani, the man in the upper right photograph with me. Now, I know this about Moni culture. I know they speak loudly. I know that their language is clipped. I know that they don't smile the same way that we smile, at least not right off the bat. So I was kind of aware of that, but I also didn't see any or didn't hear any of the standard language that let me know that they're welcoming me. So they were yelling, but I wasn't hearing like a makania, makanenga, some of the welcome stuff that I normally hear. Atan was really upset because the last tourist group to come through had come into his church and made a mess. They'd cooked in his church and left garbage in his church and then left the village. So understandably, he was upset. He wants tourists. He really wants tourists, but he needs tourists to behave considerately. So Atan and I spent about 2 hours doing what's called muna muna. Muna muna is the talk of men, or men's talk. And together we developed the Sugapa Route visitor protocols for travelers, like what to do or what not to do when you visit these villages. And here again, the essential question was, Atan, if you want a partnership, what does a partnership look like? And Atan says, I want visitors, but I want them, and they're welcome to use my church as shelter, but I want them to be considerate of my community. When I came home, I translated this document into Bahasa Indonesian, Dutch, German, Spanish, Japanese, and Russian, and now they're ready to be posted in different villages along the Sugapa Route so that we all at least understand that. In my most recent trip, I spent just under a month and visited about 10 communities, going village to village and just connecting with random individuals. I visited one area where young children had not yet seen a white man. I also joined in on some soccer matches. So just fun stuff all around. One of the other cultural differences that really was striking to me was that even if you enjoy conversation or you consider yourself a patient person, you have nothing on the Moni. The Moni absolutely loved to converse and converse. And so I found that I had to sit for hours and hours and converse, which was really challenging for me. But when I told the people, when I would sit down in their huts and at their tables and tell the people that I was traveling through the land, rather than a helicopter, traveling through the land to meet the people whose land I would travel, or I wanted to travel with my customers. They were all incredibly receptive. And as a matter of fact, one gentleman, and this I won't ever forget this because it means so much to the Moni to say this, but he said, "This is good talk. This is good talk." So all this relationship building and this visiting and traveling and all this storytelling set up a next and very important chapter in my understanding what's going on the ground in Papua. So for quite a while prior to my last trip there, I had arranged with our Moni partner for various Moni villages and to come together, or the men in those villages to come together in one place and participate in a seminar where we could teach them, like, what do you do with tourists? So during the first evening of that, the OPM, the Free Papua Movement commander, and several of his top lieutenants came to visit. And really what they're doing is they want to know who I am, what I'm doing, and then they're going to decide whether I can continue or not. And it was a bit tense, but he and his men just kind of walked into a small room where Amy and I were having dinner and introduced himself. And he could probably see that my eyes were just large and frightened, but he told me right away that today I come with a smile. And this that settled me quite a bit, because this is OPM commander, and he and his group have been responsible for some very savage attacks, even quite recently. So we chatted for a little while that evening, and he gave us permission to proceed, and then he said he's going to preside over the training the following day. So that was all great. We were doing our training, and halfway through the day, more men from more villages are just filtering into town, and just before noon, a large muna takes place. Now, a muna is a conversation that can run the gamut of topics, but it's traditionally reserved for tribal men, and they discuss things like the strategies for waging war, or the secrets of the hunt, or how to better protect your families. So this was not a place for Amy or me. This was completely a place for these men to decide whether they wanted tourism and tourists in their world. So the OPM man spoke, the OPM leader spoke, and the men of the village responded, and our Moni partner kind of cast the vision, and there was just a lot of loud talking for quite a while. And then this one man stands up, the man in yellow, in the lower photo there, and he said the most stunning thing. He said, and he points, me and Amy are off to the side, and he stands up and he points to Amy and he says, "Who is that woman?" He says, "That is Amisana, the sister of Zanimala," speaking of her brother John, "the children of Tuwani," speaking of Bill Cutts. He said, "Now I will listen." You see, he recognized what the Cutts had done in their world, and he said, "Now I will listen." So, I mean, the OPM is a very fractious movement. The commander told us, that he was in charge of the Ilaga area where the commercial climbing group was held in 2012, and he's also in charge of the Sugapa area where we start our treks. Most of our treks start these days now that Ilaga is too tense. He stood up and he said, "The time for my name to be big is over," implying that, a new day is here. Let's collaborate together, villagers, men of different villages, for tourism. Let's reap the rewards of this tourism that's coming through. So I don't doubt that the man has clout. I also don't think that the whole world changed that day. But I do look back and recognize that whatever relationship building was happening here, I can credit back toward the work that the Cuttses did. So the training seminar was a raging success. We discussed what was working well in other areas where we work, like our Peru and our Nepal treks. What wasn't working well, like porters being mistreated, which we hear a lot about, and what we might need to change For example, there's no plan at all for human waste on these tours. We discussed how to keep the porters healthy and safe along the trek and in the mountains. We practiced setting up tents, and we concluded, this is so cool, by awarding certificates of accomplishment to the folks who participated in the training so that they could show evidence of learning to whatever tour operator might want to hire them, right? Not just our guys, not just us. Before I say that, it's difficult to know if this is accurate or not, to be quite honest, but I was told that this was the very first time that a foreigner ever hosted a seminar for indigenous Papuan people. This is the very first time that an indigenous Papuan man was the tour operator rather than an Indonesian or a foreigner. And certainly, I think this is true, this is the very first time that the OPM sat in on a mountaineering training seminar. But 35 men from varying villages, some were Moni, some were of the Dani tribe, they received certificates. So now, as a biased toward Action American, I wanted to do more, right? I mean, we all do. We want to do it all. But the truth is that relationship building is an incredibly slow and incredibly lengthy, and rightfully so, process. And to speak practically, we can't expect to replicate the lifelong interactions that Bill and Gracie had. We can't expect to replicate what John and Amy have done. I don't immediately even expect you to replicate the couple of years and all the trips of relationship building that I've done there. Especially not if you're only going there for a 1 or 2 week adventure, and maybe once in your life. But visiting even once, we can know so much more about this place than simply, I need rubber boots because there's a lot of mud. Right? We can know a lot more than that. So for your own background, I'm going to encourage you to go to our website and look at the Why Climb with RMI, or look at our Responsible Initiatives page. Perhaps go to my Climb Carstensz blog. Or if not us, there are a lot of reliable online resources that let you know about the people and their land and their culture that can really help you build a relationship. And then this is going to be more challenging, but you have to choose, we all have to choose in-country tour operators who treat their porters well. Not just who say they treat their porters well, but who truly treat their porters well. And I can't go into what all that looks like, that's a whole different topic. But that's the hallmark of a good tour operator, is how well they treat their porters. I think those ideas alone help us to give relationship that much better. And we believe that this social ethic of giving relationship does equal access in Papua, not just for the sake of access, but also for the sake of the people and the land there. All right, so that's happy travels, I say. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Could we turn the lights on a little bit, please? Yes?
As you think about continuing your work and a sustainable model, how are you working to involve women at half of the community, half of the population?
Ooh.
And time again, while I think it's a Western value, we see time again that when women are educated, when girls are involved,
Yeah.
when women are involved, that's when sustainable change happens. So I'd love to hear ideas you have with this.
Yeah, that's talk about another huge can of worms, right? I was telling Roger Robinson that when I mentioned disposing of human waste properly, they either didn't answer me or they laughed in my face. It's just not anything that they think about, and to be quite honest, they have very little regard still for women. It wasn't all that long ago that women were valued beneath the pig, which is their most prized possession. So if you look at, that's where we come from, and I'm talking 1960, 1970, okay, to the Western empowered woman's stand, right? There's a lot of work to be done there. I will say that, yeah, come on. So One of my main partners this year was Amy. It was me and our Moni partner Maximus with Amy, or her brother John, or John's wife with Amy. But even so, it was very difficult for her to have the same footing as a man. Even though she grew up there, she knew the language, and she was supported by, I'll call us background men. I don't have an immediate plan of how to make that magic happen. And certainly, you know, our respect for women or our involvement in women in the Western society isn't going to change. You know, we have, matter of fact, my last trip, I had 3 of my 4 climbers were women, and I went to Carstensz with Amy. And that's a start, possibly, where they're seeing the value. I will say, I'll keep this to a minute, one of the church services that I spoke in, I spoke specifically to a group of warriors, young men, warriors, and the spousal abuse in that village was remarkable. And so I was asked to come in by the pastor, and now I'm speaking as a Christian, okay? But I was giving them an empowering message about what it means to value each life regardless of gender. So that's more of a, you know, my religious bent there. But because it's such a strong Christian population there, I have that avenue. And that's a way to help do it. Yes, sir.
Alex, I've enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
I look out 5 or 10 years, and
Yeah.
I just think jealousy. And we're going to have, I look at your successful model, and sort of working in and out of Melanesia a lot, I just think,
Yeah.
good luck.
Yes. Oh, it's
Soon,
overwhelming.
I think, boy, there's going to be bloodshed.
Well, and this is not what we want. So,
You're creating-
my tour operator is Maximus Tipagao, Adventures Carstensz, adventurescarstensz.com. Find them, use them. The trouble is, you know, we have Indonesian partners, and nobody who's currently operating there wants to drop their business and give their business to Maximus. I realize that. So that's a conundrum that we're in. I'm not saying that the Indonesians aren't doing it well. I'm not saying that Maximus is going to do it perfect. As a matter of fact, those models seem to be working right now because they're established. And this model takes so much time and is unestablished. But what I'm advocating, and I don't care whether it's Americans working with the indigenous people or Indonesians working with the indigenous people, even if the Indonesians are the owner-operators, that we all respect the people and the land and their way of life.
And I understand that, but if you look out a decade, there's going to be haves, there's going to be have-nots. And in a Melanesian context,
Yeah.
you understand that,
Yeah.
that it's going to lead to bloodshed.
Well, there is bloodshed now.
Yeah, I know.
So,
And so, I mean, this is a real hypothetical question. Should we be entering into this area? Because the context we're in is you're going to have losers.
sure. And that's probably true of every area that we go, right?
But we don't kill people when we lose. In this context, we can.
I don't have an answer to, do I believe we should go there? I believe we can go there responsibly. And remember, the indigenous Papuans want the tourism. This isn't us forcing. Challenging questions. There's a lot of challenging stuff going on here. So, no, it's fantastic. I mean, I've only been doing this since 2011, and when I listened to the presentations this morning, I'm like, oh boy, yeah, this is high quality, high caliber. I'm kind of in deep water by myself right now. So, all right, thank you.
One more question out there? Well, thank you very much, Alex.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Okay, we'll go ahead. We're just a little bit behind, but we've got a lot of time up to the noon hour. So let's take a 10-minute break.